The last message from the Galavrck was a warning, a desperate cry for help that echoed through the stars, carrying with it a shocking revelation: the mighty Galavrck, once the rulers of the galaxy, were crumbling from within. Eric stared at the transmission, his mind racing. He had heard rumors about their downfall, whispers of a once proud empire losing its grip on power. But now, sitting in the quiet of his command center, the truth hit him like a thunderclap. The Galavrck, their towering cities, their advanced technology, their nearly indestructible military, were on the brink of collapse. And no one knew why. He leaned forward, studying the message again, trying to make sense of the chaotic data that streamed across his screen. The Galavrck leader, Tarlon, had sent this final plea not just to humanity, but to Eric personally. The message was clear, but the meaning was hidden within cryptic words and symbols. "They are close," Tarlon had written. "The truth about our fall lies within our very heart. And the one who betrayed us is closer than you think." Eric couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary war. The Galavrck weren't just fighting an external enemy, they were fighting something far more insidious. But who could betray such a powerful race? Who could bring down the seemingly unshakable Galavrck from the inside? As Eric suited up for his mission, a quiet voice in the back of his mind reminded him of his humble origins. A child of Earth's poorest colonies, he had worked his way up through the ranks of humanity's military forces. He had earned his place among the elite, but even now, he still carried the weight of his beginnings, an outsider in the midst of galactic powerhouses. He knew he couldn't afford to make a mistake this time. Lives were at stake. He joined his team in the shuttle bay, where a group of seasoned soldiers was preparing for the mission. Their faces were grim, but there was a shared understanding among them: they had a job to do, and they couldn't afford failure. "Eric, you're sure about this?" asked Captain Kale, the team's leader. Her voice was steady, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. "We don't have a choice," Eric replied, scanning the faces of his crew. "Tarlon's message is clear. The Galavrck are dying, and someone on their side is behind it. We need to find out who." The shuttle hummed to life, and as they ascended into the stars, the reality of their mission settled in. Eric had always admired the Galavrck, their strength, their intelligence, their almost mythical status in the galaxy. But now, those very qualities were unraveling, revealing cracks in their foundation. The journey to the Galavrck homeworld was swift, the silence between the crew members heavy with unspoken questions. Eric tried to focus, but every time he looked out at the vast expanse of space, his mind wandered back to the message. "The truth lies within our very heart." What could that possibly mean? As their shuttle approached the planet's surface, the scene before them was both awe-inspiring and horrifying. Once great cities now lay in ruins, their towering spires reduced to rubble. Massive ships, once the pride of the Galavrck fleet, were scattered across the landscape like discarded toys. This was no longer a thriving civilization. This was the aftermath of destruction, the ruin of an empire that had once seemed unstoppable. The shuttle landed in a small, barren courtyard, surrounded by the remnants of a once glorious palace. Eric and his team disembarked, their boots crunching on the dust-covered ground. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and a heavy silence hung over everything. A figure approached from the shadows. It was Tarlon, the leader of the Galavrck. His once proud stature seemed diminished, his face drawn and weary. Yet, his eyes still burned with a fierce determination. "Eric," Tarlon greeted him with a nod. "I'm glad you came." "Tell me everything," Eric said, his voice steady. "What happened? Why is your empire falling apart?" Tarlon looked over his shoulder, as if checking for anyone who might be listening. "There is a traitor among us. Someone within the highest ranks of our council has betrayed us. They've been feeding our enemies information, sabotaging our technology, and slowly dismantling everything we built." Eric's heart skipped a beat. The words sent a chill down his spine. Who could betray the Galavrck, and why? The truth lies within our very heart, Eric murmured, recalling Tarlan's message. What does that mean? Tarlan's eyes darkened. It's the Council. The very core of our government. Someone has poisoned it, and we don't know who. But I believe the key to saving us is hidden there. Eric's mind raced. The Council? That was where the most powerful leaders of the Galavrck resided. If someone had betrayed them from within their own ranks, it would explain the sudden collapse of their empire. But how deep did the corruption go? Then we start there, Eric said, his voice firm. We find this traitor, and we end this before it's too late. Tarlan nodded, his expression grim. I hope you're right. But be careful, Eric. The enemy is closer than you think. As Eric and his team prepared to enter the heart of the Galavrck capital, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. Every step he took seemed to echo with a sense of impending danger. The fall of the Galavrck wasn't just about politics or war, it was personal. And the twist? It was just beginning. The underground corridors of the Galavrck capital were cold and silent, their walls adorned with ancient symbols of a once proud race. Eric's team moved quietly through the maze-like tunnels, their footsteps muffled by the thick dust that had accumulated over the years. The city was in ruins, its heart hollowed out, and yet, there was a strange feeling of tension in the air. They weren't just walking through a desolate place, they were walking through the remnants of something that had been betrayed. Tarlan led the way, his movements cautious but purposeful. He knew these halls better than anyone, having once ruled them with power and pride. But now, everything was different. Everything had changed. And Eric couldn't help but notice how the weight of the Empire's fall seemed to hang on Tarlan's shoulders. You were once the most powerful beings in the galaxy, Eric said, trying to break the silence. How could this happen? How could a betrayal from within bring you to your knees? Tarlan's gaze was distant, as if the question was too painful to answer. He didn't speak for several moments, and when he did, his voice was heavy with regret. The Galavrck were always proud of our strength. But strength alone is never enough. We failed to see that there were cracks within our own foundations, cracks that were hidden, even from us. And someone exploited those cracks. Eric felt the weight of Tarlan's words, but he didn't dwell on them. There was no time for sympathy now. The task at hand was urgent. They needed to uncover the truth, and fast. The team reached the central chamber, a vast room that once served as the heart of the Galavrck Council. The tall, imposing chairs where the leaders used to sit were now overturned, and the once glowing symbols of power had flickered out. The room was empty, except for the faint hum of an ancient system still running in the background. Tarlan approached the main control panel, his hands trembling slightly as he activated it. A holographic projection appeared in front of them, displaying a map of the Empire, its sectors marked with bright red symbols. Eric could see the destruction that had spread across the galaxy, a pattern that was unmistakable. But it wasn't just the battles that had destroyed the Galavrck. It was something far more insidious. This is where it began, Tarlan said, his finger tracing a path across the map. A single, subtle sabotage. It was small at first, nothing anyone could notice. But over time, it grew. And soon, the cracks spread too far. Eric leaned in, studying the map. The pattern was clear now. It wasn't just a random attack, it was a carefully orchestrated campaign of destruction. Someone had been targeting key points within the Empire, slowly weakening its defenses, undermining its power from within. But who? Eric asked, his voice sharp. Who is behind this? Tarlan's face tightened. That's what we need to find out. I have a name, someone who was always close to the Council. Someone trusted. He paused, his eyes darkening. His name is Darnock. The name sent a chill through Eric's spine. Darnock was one of the Galavrck's highest-ranking officers, a brilliant tactician known for his ruthlessness in battle. He had been a key figure in the Galavrck's rise to power, and his loyalty had never been questioned. Until now. Are you sure? Eric asked, his voice low. Darnock was one of your most trusted leaders. Could he really be behind all of this? Tarlon hesitated. I don't know. But everything points to him. He had access to everything, every piece of intelligence, every military plan. If he wanted to bring us down from the inside, he could. The thought was staggering. The betrayal of someone so close to the heart of the Empire was unthinkable. But if Darnock was the one behind the sabotage, it meant that the Galavrck had been living in a lie for years, blind to the very enemy they had welcomed into their midst. As Eric and his team continued their investigation, they uncovered more unsettling truths. Darnock's involvement wasn't just about military sabotage. He had been manipulating the very core of Galavrck politics, using his position to turn allies into enemies and fracture the once unified empire. Each new revelation was more disturbing than the last, showing just how deeply the web of deception ran. The more Eric learned about Darnock's schemes, the more he realized how much humanity had in common with the Galavrck. The betrayal wasn't just about politics or power, it was about trust. It was about the very core of what made civilizations thrive. And if the Galavrck couldn't repair their broken trust, their empire would be lost forever. The team had gathered enough evidence to confront Darnock, but Eric knew that the confrontation wouldn't be easy. Darnock was a master manipulator, and his loyalty to the Galavrck was no longer clear. Eric was certain that Darnock's true motivations went far beyond a simple desire for power. There was something else at play here, something deeper. And that was what terrified him the most. Back in the control room, Eric stood in front of the holographic map, his mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they created was darker than he could have imagined. The Galavrck's fall wasn't just the result of a single betrayal, it was the culmination of years of hidden weakness, of unspoken fears and divided loyalties. And now, that darkness was threatening to consume everything. But there was hope. Eric's team had uncovered the truth. The Galavrck weren't doomed yet. There was still a chance to stop Darnock, to rebuild the empire, to restore the trust that had been shattered. He turned to Tarlon, who had been silently watching him. We need to find Darnock. Now. Tarlon nodded. I know. But it won't be easy. He's always been one step ahead of us. As they made their preparations for the final confrontation, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that the true test was still to come. The enemy wasn't just Darnock. The real enemy was the darkness within, the same darkness that had been growing for years, unchecked and unchallenged. And Eric knew that if the Galavrck didn't face that darkness head-on, they would fall forever. Eric and his team moved swiftly through the remains of the Galavrck capital. Their destination was a hidden underground complex, long abandoned, but crucial to uncovering the truth. Darnock, the man they now believed to be behind the destruction of the Galavrck, had once frequented this place. It was said to house some of the deepest secrets of the Galavrck's governing council, and Eric's only hope of catching Darnock before it was too late rested on finding something hidden here. The air in the underground complex was heavy, filled with the dust of ages. The walls seemed to close in around them as they descended deeper into the heart of the ruin. There was no sound except for the hum of their equipment and the occasional creak of old pipes. Yet, Eric could feel the weight of something else in the air, something much darker. Tarlon led the way, his gaze fixed ahead, but his hands trembled slightly. The once proud leader of the Galavrck now seemed like a man on the verge of breaking. Eric couldn't blame him. Tarlon had once commanded the loyalty of billions, but now he was left with a fractured empire and the horrifying knowledge that his closest allies might have been the ones to bring it all down. They reached the heart of the complex, a large room filled with ancient machinery and complex control panels. It was here that the Council had once made their most important decisions, their fate shaped by the flickering lights and holographic screens before them. But now, everything was dead, frozen in time. The only sign of life was the faint sound of their footsteps on the cold floor. "There," Tarlon said, pointing to a large, sealed door at the far side of the room. "This leads to Darnock's personal chambers. If there's anything to find, it will be there." Eric nodded, signaling to his team. They approached the door, weapons at the ready, preparing for whatever lay beyond. With a sharp hiss, the door opened, revealing the darkened interior of the room. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of metal and decay. The room was dimly lit, with only a few broken lights flickering overhead. On the far wall was a large display screen, covered in dust but still operational. The moment Eric stepped inside, he felt a chill run down his spine. It was as if the room itself was waiting for them to uncover something. He moved toward the screen, his fingers hovering over the control panel. "What is this?" he muttered to himself as he activated the system. A series of encrypted files appeared on the screen, their contents hidden behind layers of security. Eric was no hacker, but he had learned enough over the years to know that nothing in this galaxy was truly secure. Within moments, the files decrypted, revealing documents, messages, and plans. The first thing that caught Eric's eye was a series of private communications between Darnock and an unnamed faction. The messages were filled with references to the collapse and the final plan, clear indicators of a premeditated betrayal. But it wasn't just about the sabotage. Darnock had been orchestrating a systematic dismantling of the Galavrck's government for years. Then, Eric found something even more shocking, a personal letter from Darnock to Tarlon. "Tarlon, my old friend. You trusted me, and I betrayed you. I have no excuses for my actions. But know this, everything I have done for the Galavrck. We were never meant to be rulers. You were blind to the weaknesses of our empire, and I can no longer stand by as it crumbles. The galaxy belongs to the strong, and I will be the one to lead us into a new age." Eric felt the weight of the letter hit him like a punch to the gut. Darnock's words were chilling. He had never expected betrayal to come in such a cold, calculated form. He had always seen Darnock as a fierce, loyal warrior, but now he realized that loyalty had been nothing more than a mask, a facade to hide the truth. Tarlon stood behind him, his face pale as he read the letter over Eric's shoulder. His voice was barely a whisper when he spoke. "I trusted him," Tarlon said, his voice trembling. "I thought he was my brother. But he never saw our empire as I did. He only saw power to reshape the galaxy in his own image." Eric turned to face Tarlon, his expression hardening. "Why didn't you see it sooner? Why didn't you stop him before it was too late?" Tarlon looked away, guilt written all over his face. "I couldn't. I was too blinded by my own pride. I thought I had everything under control. But I was wrong. Darnock was always smarter than I gave him credit for. He knew exactly how to play us all." Eric's mind raced as he processed the information. If Darnock was planning to reshape the galaxy, he wouldn't stop until he had accomplished his goal. And that meant the end of the Galavrck, the end of humanity's hope for peace, and the rise of a new, brutal order. "We need to stop him," Eric said, his voice firm. "If he's still out there, we need to find him before he can do any more damage." Tarlon nodded, his eyes filled with both determination and regret. "He won't be easy to find. But we have no choice now. We must stop him before it's too late." The truth was now painfully clear. The Galavrck had not fallen because of a single battle or an overwhelming force from outside. No, they had fallen because of the darkness that had festered within their own ranks. Darnock had been the poison in their system, slowly eroding the empire from the inside. But now, with the truth exposed, there was no time to mourn the past. Eric knew that the future of the galaxy rested on their ability to stop Darnock, to undo the damage he had caused before it was too late. As the team prepared for their next steps, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that their battle was just beginning. The true scope of Darnock's plans had yet to be revealed, and Eric knew that the final confrontation would not just be a fight for survival, but a fight for the very soul of the galaxy. The dawn on the Galavrck homeworld was no longer bright with the promise of a new beginning, but dimmed by the shadow of uncertainty. The Galavrck Empire had fallen, not to an external force, but from the inside out. The one who had once been a trusted leader, Darnock, was now the face of that collapse, a man whose ambition had torn apart everything the Galavrck stood for. Eric and his team stood in the middle of the destroyed capital, the rubble of the once grand palace surrounding them. Their mission had changed. It was no longer just about uncovering the traitor, it was about saving what little was left of the Galavrck. But how? Eric had no answers. All he had was the knowledge that humanity's survival depended on them. "We're not just fighting for the Galavrck anymore," Eric said, his voice firm. "We're fighting for the future. We can't let Darnock's ambition tear apart everything we've built together. If he succeeds here, it won't just be the end for the Galavrck. It will be the end for humanity, too." The weight of those words hung in the air as Eric turned to face Tarlon. The Galavrck leader's face was a mix of sorrow and determination, sorrow for his empire's collapse, and determination to prevent it from spiraling into something worse. "We may have lost the war, Eric," Tarlon said quietly, "but we haven't lost everything. There's still a chance. We need your help. Humanity's help." Eric's brow furrowed. "You're asking us to do more than just help you stop Darnock. You're asking us to take a leadership role, to guide you out of this mess." Tarlon nodded gravely. "You have no idea how deep this runs. Darnock didn't just corrupt our empire, he planted seeds of division, mistrust. And now, with the galaxy fractured as it is, we don't have the strength to survive alone. But together, we might have a chance." Eric stood still for a moment, considering the weight of Tarlon's words. For years, humanity had struggled just to survive in a galaxy filled with powerful forces. To now be asked to help rebuild a fallen empire was an enormous responsibility. But then, Eric realized something. This wasn't just about the Galavrck. This was about humanity's place in the galaxy. If they didn't step up now, they would always be seen as the weak, powerless species, unable to lead, to protect, to thrive. "We've seen what happens when you place your trust in a single person, whether it's Darnock or anyone else," Eric said. "But what we also know is that humanity's strength lies in its unity. We're not perfect, but we know how to fight together, how to find strength in each other when everything else is falling apart." Tarlon's eyes narrowed, but there was a spark of hope in them. "Perhaps you're right. Maybe we can still salvage this, not just for the Galavrck, but for the future of the galaxy." The plan was set into motion. Eric's team worked side by side with the remaining Galavrck forces to craft a strategy. The first goal was to root out Darnock's hidden allies within the remnants of the Galavrck Council. It wouldn't be easy. Darnock had left behind a complex network of loyalists who would stop at nothing to see his vision fulfilled. The second goal, however, was even more daunting, rebuilding trust between humanity and the Galavrck. For that to happen, both sides had to be willing to lay down their weapons and stand together for something greater than their individual survival. Eric spent the next few days coordinating with both sides, laying the groundwork for a new alliance, an alliance based not on domination, but on mutual respect. He'd learned long ago that strength didn't always come from overwhelming force. Sometimes, it came from standing firm together, even in the face of impossible odds. "There's no going back now," Eric said as he stood in front of a small group of human and Galavrck soldiers. "We've made our choice. We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for something bigger, something better. Together, we will show the galaxy what true strength looks like. The plan was risky. The alliance between the humans and the Galavrck was fragile at best, but Eric had no choice but to hope. Hope that humanity's resilience could be enough to overcome the darkness that had infiltrated the Galavrck's ranks. Hope that they could rebuild, not just the Galavrck's empire, but the galaxy itself. Meanwhile, Darnock had been watching from the shadows, his every move calculated and deliberate. He had already known that the Galavrck would eventually seek help from humanity. It was inevitable. The two species had always been drawn together by necessity, but now their fates were intertwined in a way neither could have predicted. Darnock smiled darkly as he watched the movements of Eric and Tarlan's forces from his hidden base. He had planned for this. He knew humanity would play a part in the Galavrck's downfall, it was all part of his grand design. The only question now was how long it would take for Eric and his allies to realize the truth: they were walking into a trap. Darnock's forces were already scattered across the galaxy, working in secret to sabotage any hope the Alliance had of succeeding. He would not allow anyone, not even the humans, to interfere with his vision for the galaxy's future. His empire, once born from power and strength, was now fueled by a relentless ambition to reshape the stars in his own image. As Eric and Tarlan prepared for their final confrontation with Darnock, Eric knew that the fight ahead would not just be a battle of armies, it would be a battle for the very soul of the galaxy. If they succeeded, they would not only save the Galavrck but create a new, united future. But if they failed, the darkness that Darnock had unleashed would consume them all. Eric didn't know what the future would hold, but one thing was clear: this was humanity's moment to step into the light, to show the galaxy that, no matter the odds, they could rise to any challenge. And that, in itself, was the greatest hope of all. The skies above the Galavrck homeworld were heavy with the scent of impending conflict, a tension that made the air feel thick and unyielding. Eric stood at the forefront of the human Galavrck alliance's final offensive against Darnock, a vast force gathering at their backs. Every soldier, every fighter, was prepared for what could be the most pivotal battle in the history of the galaxy. But Eric knew that this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a battle to define the future. The war had dragged on for months. Every battle had brought them closer to the truth, but each victory felt hollow as they unearthed more about Darnock's ruthless plot to reshape the galaxy in his image. The Galavrck had been betrayed at the highest levels, their government shattered by a single man's ambition. And now, with the galaxy teetering on the edge of destruction, humanity had stepped in, not just to help, but to lead. As Eric prepared to meet with Tarlan and finalize their strategy, he couldn't shake the gravity of the situation. They weren't just battling an enemy. They were fighting for a galaxy that had lost its way, fighting to show that unity and trust could still overcome the darkest of forces. Yet, something gnawed at the back of his mind, the knowledge that Darnock's forces were everywhere, hidden in plain sight, and the battle they were preparing for could very well be a trap. "We've come too far to turn back," Eric muttered to himself, his voice filled with determination. "We either win this or lose everything." Tarlan approached, his face hard but resolute. The Galavrck leader looked older now, wearier than when Eric had first met him. The weight of the Empire's fall had taken its toll, but there was still a fire in his eyes. Tarlan knew this was their last chance. "We're ready," Tarlan said, his voice steady. "The Alliance is prepared to strike at Darnock's stronghold. But I don't need to tell you, it won't be easy. He's been planning for this. He knows we're coming." Eric nodded. "We know the risks. But we have to do this, for the future of the galaxy. We fight not just for survival, but for the kind of galaxy we want to build, one where trust and strength go hand in hand." Tarlan placed a hand on Eric's shoulder, his grip firm. "Your words give me hope, Eric. But remember, Darnock is no fool. He's planned this moment for years, and he's got more than just soldiers at his disposal. We need to be smarter than him. And that means we can't just be strong, we need to be strategic. The final plan was set. The forces would strike Darnock's stronghold from all sides, engaging his defenses and drawing his forces into the open. At the same time, a small group, led by Eric and Tarlon, would infiltrate the heart of Darnock's base and confront the traitor himself. It was a risky plan, but it was their only hope. The journey to Darnock's stronghold was a perilous one. Eric's team, along with a handful of trusted Galavrck warriors, moved under cover of darkness, making their way toward the heavily fortified planet that was the center of Darnock's power. The closer they got, the more the tension mounted. Every sense in Eric's body screamed that they were walking into a trap, but there was no turning back now. As they landed on the outskirts of Darnock's base, Eric felt the weight of the mission press down on him. His heart pounded in his chest, but he knew this was the moment that would define everything. It wasn't just the future of the Galavrck or humanity at stake, it was the future of peace across the galaxy. They moved quickly, stealthily, through the jungle-like terrain surrounding the base, avoiding the patrols and security systems that Darnock had set up. Every corner they turned felt like a step closer to the unknown, every rustling leaf or distant noise sending their hearts into overdrive. But it was Eric's focus that kept them on track, his every move calculated, every decision made with precision. Finally, they reached the outer walls of Darnock's stronghold, a towering structure that seemed almost alive with energy. The security was fierce, but Eric's team had trained for moments like this. They bypassed the security grid, entering the heart of the base without a sound. Inside, the tension was unbearable. Darnock had to be close. His network of spies and soldiers was vast, but Eric knew that the true confrontation would happen in the heart of the stronghold, where Darnock would be waiting. The final confrontation was a clash of wills as much as it was a battle of strength. Darnock stood before them in his command center, his back to a wall of screens displaying the ongoing war across the galaxy. His eyes glowed with the cold, calculating focus of a man who had thought himself invincible, his mind always 5 steps ahead. "You came," Darnock said with a sneer, turning to face Eric and Tarlon. "I knew you would. But it's too late. You've already lost." Eric stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "You betrayed everything the Galavrck once stood for. You destroyed your own people for your twisted vision. You're the one who's lost." Darnock's laugh was hollow, echoing through the chamber. "You think you can stop me now? I've already won. The galaxy will fall under my control. Your pitiful alliance won't change that." The word stung, but Eric knew the truth. They weren't fighting for the galaxy's survival just by stopping Darnock, they were fighting for its soul. And the battle was only just beginning. The fight was brutal, and the tension was palpable. Darnock's forces had ambushed them at every turn, but with the Galavrck and humanity united, they held their ground. As the final battle raged outside, Eric and Tarlon pushed forward, determined to confront Darnock at any cost. Finally, they reached the heart of the stronghold, where Darnock stood waiting. The battle that followed was not just one of strength, but of ideals. Darnock, with all his ambition and power, faced off against Eric, who embodied the belief that unity, trust, and the will to fight for something greater could win the day. In the end, it was the human spirit, the resilience to rise despite the odds, that won. Darnock's vision for the galaxy was destroyed, and with it, the darkness that had poisoned the Galavrck for so long. Eric stood over Darnock's defeated form, breathing heavily but filled with a sense of profound relief. The war was over, but the real work had just begun. They had defeated a tyrant, but the future of the galaxy still rested in their hands. "Is it over?" Tarlon asked, his voice almost fragile. "It's just the beginning," Eric replied, his gaze looking toward the horizon. "We rebuild now. Together." And for the first time in what felt like forever, the weight of the galaxy seemed a little lighter. The smoke from the final battle still hung in the air, but it was slowly being carried away by a gentle wind. The remains of Darnock's stronghold lay in ruins, a stark reminder of the chaos that had nearly consumed the galaxy. Eric stood in the center of the battlefield, his gaze sweeping across the destruction. The war was over, but the true challenge had only just begun. Humanity and the Galavrck had united to stop Darnock, but the galaxy had been irrevocably changed. The scars left by the conflict ran deep, not just in the land, but in the hearts of those who had fought. The Galavrck were broken, their empire shattered, and humanity had been thrust into a role they had never anticipated, one of leadership, responsibility, and hope. But despite the destruction, Eric could feel a glimmer of hope flickering in the distance. The first steps toward rebuilding had begun, and with it, a chance for a new beginning. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be countless obstacles ahead, but Eric knew that humanity had something the rest of the galaxy needed, something that could heal the wounds that had been inflicted. The days that followed the battle were filled with a flurry of activity. Tarlon and the surviving Galavrck leaders had begun the process of re-establishing their government, but they knew that they could not do it alone. The Galavrck needed humanity's help, and humanity needed the Galavrck. Their cultures had been intertwined for too long, and now they had to forge a new future together. Eric spent most of his time in meetings with Tarlon, planning the next steps for the rebuilding efforts. The Galavrck were a technologically advanced civilization, but their society had been torn apart by Darnock's betrayal. They had the tools, the resources, and the knowledge, but what they lacked was hope, and the ability to trust one another again. "It's going to take more than rebuilding cities and repairing technology," Eric said one evening, as he and Tarlon sat in a dimly lit room in the heart of the Galavrck's capital. "The real work is going to be rebuilding the trust between your people. You can't just jump into it like it's business as usual." Tarlon nodded, his face weary but resolute. "I know. I've failed them before. And now, we're all starting over. Trust is the most fragile thing we have. I don't know if it can be fixed." Eric looked at Tarlon, seeing the weight of the past in his eyes. He understood the burden. The Galavrck had been brought to their knees not just by external enemies, but by their own inability to recognize the cracks within their own empire. Those cracks had festered for far too long, and it was going to take more than just words to heal the wounds. "We'll start small," Eric said. "We build from the ground up. You need to show them that you're not just another leader who's going to fall to the same temptation as Darnock. You have to lead by example, by showing them that you're committed to rebuilding, not just with your technology, but with your hearts." Tarlon exhaled slowly, as if the weight of Eric's words had finally settled in. "It won't be easy." "No," Eric replied. "But nothing worth doing ever is." Over the following weeks, Eric worked alongside Tarlon and the other Galavrck leaders, guiding them through the difficult process of rebuilding their government. Together, they formed a new council, one that was open to all Galavrck citizens, with a focus on unity and transparency. The council would no longer be a place for political manipulation, but a space for healing, growth, and collective decision-making. Humanity played a vital role in the rebuilding efforts. While the Galavrck had advanced technology, the humans brought with them an unwavering determination, a unique resilience that the galaxy had never seen before. Eric and his team helped establish communication networks, food supplies, and medical care, ensuring that the Galavrck people had everything they needed to survive in the wake of the destruction. It wasn't just about physical rebuilding. The emotional scars left by the war were deep, and many Galavrck struggled to cope with the loss of their empire, their families, and their way of life. Eric spent hours with Tarlon, working through the healing process, listening to the voices of the Galavrck who were determined to rebuild, but also those who still felt the sting of betrayal. It was a long and painful journey, but Eric could see the first signs of progress. Months passed, and the once barren fields around the capital began to bloom again. The people were starting to come together, finding hope in each other and the prospect of a brighter future. While there were still tensions to address, there was a shared belief that they had a chance to rebuild, together. One afternoon, as Eric walked through the capital, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. It was small, but it was real. The Galavrck and humans had fought side by side, and now they were rebuilding side by side. There was a unity that hadn't existed before the war, a quiet but undeniable bond that had formed in the ashes of conflict. He was interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Tarlon approaching, his face softer than it had been in months. There was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Eric," Tarlon said, his voice tinged with gratitude. "I think we're finally starting to understand what it means to rebuild, not just our cities, but ourselves." Eric smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "It's a long road. But we're walking it together." Tarlon nodded, looking out over the capital, where signs of life were returning. "I never thought it would be possible. But now, I believe we can create something new. Something better." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the once broken city, Eric realized something profound. The galaxy had been fractured, but in the end, it wasn't power or force that would save it. It was the strength to rise from the ashes, to rebuild not just civilizations, but the trust and hope that bound them together. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving, together. The sun had long set over the rebuilt capital of the Galavrck, and the city was alive with the hum of new beginnings. The once dead streets were now filled with the vibrant sounds of people coming together, Galavrck and human alike. The ruins of the old world were slowly being replaced by new structures, not just of stone and metal, but of shared dreams and rebuilt trust. But even amidst the reconstruction, Eric couldn't forget the battle that had brought them here. The war, the betrayal, and the destruction, the loss that had nearly destroyed everything. He stood in the center of the capital, watching as the final pieces of their efforts began to fall into place. They had done it. They had survived. But more than that, they had proven that no matter how far things fall, no matter how deep the darkness, there was always a way back. There was always hope. Eric thought back to the first message from Tarlon, the plea for help that had started everything. It had seemed like an impossible task, a fight against a foe who was everywhere, hiding in plain sight. Yet, through it all, humanity had shown its strength, not through its weapons or its power, but through its resilience, its ability to unite, and its refusal to give up. The council chamber, once a place of political strife, now stood as a beacon of the new era they had forged together. The rebuilt Galavrck government, alongside the humans, would guide this new chapter of galactic history. The doors opened, and Tarlon entered, accompanied by Eric. Today was a significant day, a day for final decisions, for the beginning of a new foundation for the galaxy. They had come together, Galavrck and human alike, to make this place more than a government. It had to be a place of peace, of shared ideals, and of mutual respect. It was not just about the policies or the rules. It was about something much deeper, something Eric had come to understand over the months. Today, Tarlon began, standing before the new council, we stand together, not just as the remnants of an empire or the survivors of a war, but as something stronger. We are no longer two races divided by fear, by distrust. We are one. And it is through our unity that we will rebuild, not only our worlds but our hearts. Eric stood in the back, watching the room of dignitaries and leaders from both races. They were all here, ready to lay the foundation for a future built not on conquest, but on collaboration. It wasn't just the Galavrck who had been fractured. Humanity, too, had been changed. There was a new sense of responsibility, not just for their own survival, but for the galaxy as a whole. Eric had always known that humans were resilient, but it was through this trial that they had proven it, by leading when leadership was most needed, by standing firm in the face of impossible odds. The council continued to debate the future, but Eric's thoughts drifted. He knew that this moment, this fleeting moment of peace, was fragile. The galaxy would continue to face challenges, new enemies would rise, and tensions would flare. But the true victory, the one that had no immediate battlefield, was in the heart of the people, human and Galavrck alike. Through the ashes of war, through the betrayal, and through the loss, they had come to a realization: it was not power that made a species great. It was unity. It was the willingness to rise, together, no matter how many times they had fallen. As Eric walked out of the council chamber, he was met with a quiet, but steady applause. The future wasn't guaranteed, but in that moment, he felt a surge of hope. Humanity had done its part, not by dominating or controlling, but by standing up for what was right, by reminding everyone that together, they could overcome anything. That evening, Eric stood alone in a quiet courtyard, overlooking the city. The stars above were no longer just distant points of light. They were symbols of all that they had fought for. They were a reminder that, even in the darkest times, there was always something greater waiting for them to find the strength to reach out. Tarlon joined him, standing silently by his side. "You know," Eric said, breaking the silence, "I never thought we'd get here. Not like this." Tarlon smiled faintly. "Neither did I. But the real lesson was never about the war, Eric. It was about what we did after. How we chose to rebuild, not just our cities, but ourselves." Eric nodded, understanding at last. The Galavrck and humanity hadn't just fought for survival. They had fought for each other, for a future that could be greater than the one they had lost. They had rebuilt not just with their hands, but with their hearts. "Do you think they'll remember?" Eric asked, gazing up at the stars. Tarlon's voice was soft, but filled with conviction. "They will. Because we've shown them that the strongest thing in the galaxy isn't power or technology. It's the ability to rise from the ashes of our mistakes, to forgive, and to stand together." As the two stood there, looking out at the horizon, they knew that their story was only a chapter in a much larger history, a history that would continue to unfold. But the lesson of their journey was clear, one that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Even the mightiest civilizations can fall. But the true strength of any people lies in their ability to rebuild, to trust, and to rise again, together.